Vethrani trade delegation had been aboard orbital station Kephis 4 for 6 standard rotations, and in that time they had insulted the plumbing, the architecture, the lighting spectrum, the humidity controls, and every member of the joint operations staff at least twice. The trade summit was supposed to finalize a mineral rights compact between the Vethrani Combine and 3 smaller coalition species who had pooled their negotiating leverage. Humanity had been invited as a neutral facilitator. The Vethrani had not been pleased about that. Ambassador Dreven Koss leaned back in her articulated chair at the head of the conference table, her smooth, pale gold skin catching the overhead light. She was tall even by Vethrani standards, which meant she towered over everyone in the room. Her diplomatic attire was immaculate, layered silks in ascending shades of amber that denoted her rank within the Combine's trade caste. She had a way of tilting her elongated skull when she looked at someone that made the gesture feel like an appraisal of livestock. She was tilting it now at Marcus Cole. Marcus stood near the service console along the far wall of the conference chamber, arranging a tray of refreshments for the afternoon session. He was the station's head cook, a quiet man in his early 50s with broad hands, a sun-weathered face, and the kind of patient stillness that came from decades of working kitchens that ran on discipline and timing. He wore the standard station service tunic, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a simple cloth tucked into his belt. "You," Koss said, pointing one long finger at him, "the food servant." Marcus looked up. "Chef," he said, not correcting her exactly, just stating a fact. "Chef," Koss repeated, tasting the word like something she might send back to the kitchen. She turned to her delegation, 4 other Vethrani in similar silk layers, and said something in their own language that made all of them exhale sharply through their gill slits. Laughter. The Vethrani laughed through their gills. It sounded like a pressurized valve releasing. Facilitator Wen, the human diplomat assigned to manage the summit, cleared her throat from the head of the table. She was a compact woman with gray-streaked hair pulled into a tight knot, and she had been navigating Vethrani condescension for 6 days with the kind of calm that suggested she had seen much worse. "Ambassador Koss, if we could return to the mineral extraction framework in Section 3. "No," Koss said, still looking at Marcus. "We will not return to Section 3. We will not return to any section. This summit is stalled because nobody at this table has offered us a reason to continue." When paused, "The framework offers a 32% increase in refinery access." "Percentages," Koss said, waving a hand as if dispersing smoke. "Numbers. Everyone has numbers. The Rithki have numbers. The Sulan have numbers. Humans have numbers. But the Combine does not trade on numbers alone. We trade on respect, facilitator, on demonstrated worth. And so far, the only thing this station has demonstrated is that it knows how to circulate stale air and serve tepid meals." The jab landed where it was aimed. The Sulan delegation, 3 stocky crustacean-shelled beings seated along the left side of the table, shifted uncomfortably. The Rithki pair, avian-featured and quiet, exchanged a glance. Everyone understood. Koss was looking for a reason to walk away with concessions, and she was manufacturing grievances to justify it. Marcus set the last cup on the tray and picked it up. He crossed the room without hurrying, placed a cup in front of each delegation, and returned to the service console. The whole operation took about 40 seconds. He did not look at Koss. "The meals," Koss continued, now addressing the room as though delivering a lecture, "have been particularly disappointing. On Vethra, cuisine is a diplomatic language. The quality of what is served reflects the seriousness of the engagement. To serve what your kitchen has been serving is to say, plainly, that you do not consider this summit worth the effort." Wen glanced at Marcus. Marcus was wiping down the counter. He did not look up. "If you would like to discuss menu adjustments," Wen began. "I would not," Koss said. "I would like to discuss why humanity believes that a species which has mastered interstellar travel, gravity manipulation, and quantum-locked encryption, cannot produce a single meal that does not taste like recycled protein paste. One of the other Vethrani, a younger male named Torek, leaned forward. On Vithra, a trade delegation that served food of this quality would be asked to leave the chamber. It would be considered an insult. "Thank you, Torek," Koss said. "An insult, that is the word." Wen held her composure. The station's provisions are standard coalition grade. They are nutritionally optimized for multi-species consumption. Chef Cole manages an impressive operation given the dietary constraints of 7 species aboard. "Standard," Koss said, "coalition grade. Nutritionally optimized." She recited the words like a diagnosis. "Yes, I have eaten standard coalition-grade food for 6 days, and I can confirm that it is optimized for the precise experience of tasting nothing at all." The gill valve laughter again. Even one of the Rithki delegates covered her beak with a feathered hand, which Marcus knew was the Rithki equivalent of hiding a smile. Marcus finished wiping the counter. He folded the cloth neatly and set it aside. "The Combine," Koss said, drawing herself up in her chair, "has a tradition. When a trade summit reaches an impasse, we resolve it through a gesture of cultural merit, a demonstration, a proof that the parties at the table are worthy of the Combine's partnership." She paused, letting the silence carry weight. On Vithra, that demonstration is culinary, a formal preparation challenge. Each delegation presents a single dish that embodies their species' understanding of flavor, technique, and intention. The Combine's senior arbiter judges not just the food, but what it reveals about the culture that produced it. Wen blinked. "You're proposing a cooking competition." "I am proposing a cultural merit evaluation through cuisine," Koss corrected. "The distinction matters." "And the outcome of this evaluation?" "The delegation that demonstrates the highest culinary merit earns a preferential position in the compact negotiation. The delegation that demonstrates the lowest is asked to withdraw its objections to Section 3. Koss smiled. It was a precise, calculated expression that showed exactly 3 of her small, flat teeth. "The Combine, of course, will also compete. We have our own chef aboard." Wen looked at the Sulan delegation. Their lead negotiator, a broad-shouldered crustacean named Garrick, clacked his mandibles once, which meant he was thinking. He looked at his colleagues, then back at Wen, and gave a slow nod. The Rithki pair conferred in whispers and nodded as well. Wen looked at Marcus. Marcus was standing at the counter with his hands at his sides. He had been listening. He always listened. It was one of the things that made him good at his job, and one of the things that people rarely noticed about him. "Chef Cole," Wen said carefully, "the delegation is proposing." "I heard," Marcus said. "Would you be willing to participate?" Marcus considered this for about 2 seconds. "Yes." Koss's smile widened by a fraction. She turned to Torek. "The human says yes." Another burst of gill valve pressure. "Excellent, this should be instructive." The challenge was set for the following day. The station's main galley would be divided into 4 preparation areas, one for each competing delegation. Each team had 6 hours to prepare a single dish. The Vethrani arbiter, a wizened elder named High Palate Sarova, would judge. Koss had insisted on a Vethrani judge, and Wen had agreed because refusing would have given Koss the excuse she wanted to walk away entirely. Word of the challenge spread through Kephis 4 within the hour. Station personnel had a communication network that operated faster than any official channel. The mess hall staff told engineering, engineering told the docking crews, and the docking crews told a Terran freighter captain named Hollies who had been waiting for a departure clearance for 2 days and was bored enough to take an interest. By evening, the observation gallery had been expanded. Station Commander Oak had authorized additional seating, ostensibly for diplomatic transparency purposes, but actually because half his crew had requested to attend and denying them would have caused a morale problem more complicated than the trade summit itself. Marcus spent the evening before the challenge doing what he always did. He reviewed his inventory. He checked his equipment. He thought about food. The station's supply manifest was not inspiring. Coalition-grade provisions meant standardized protein bases, hydroponic vegetables in limited variety, synthetic dairy alternatives, shelf-stable grains, and a modest selection of Earth-origin spices that Marcus had been supplementing from his personal stores since his first week aboard. The Vethrani had brought their own ingredients from their ship, a fact that Koss had announced with considerable satisfaction. The challenge had been designed, of course, as a trap. Marcus understood this the way he understood Messi in place, automatically, without needing to think about it. The Vethrani had brought their own chef, their own ingredients, their own judge. The other delegations would participate out of obligation and perform respectably. The human delegation was expected to fail embarrassingly, proving Koss's point about humanity's cultural inadequacy and giving her the diplomatic leverage she needed to gut Section 3. It was, Marcus reflected while drying his knife, a fairly good plan. It had one flaw, which was that it assumed Marcus would cook like someone who had something to prove. He did not have anything to prove. He was a cook. He was going to cook. Their chef has been preparing combine dishes for 20 years. Lieutenant Park told Marcus that evening in the galley. Park was the station's logistics officer, a young man who had taken a personal interest in Marcus's operation, because Marcus was the only person on Cephas 4 who could make reconstituted coffee taste like it had been grown somewhere with actual sunlight. They've got specialty ingredients, Vethrani thermocure spices, something called resonance oils. Apparently the flavors interact with the taster's neurochemistry. It's not just taste, it's a whole sensory experience. Marcus nodded. He was sorting through his spice cabinet, a repurposed storage locker that he had organized with the same precision a surgeon might apply to an instrument tray. The Sulan are doing some kind of fermented reef paste, Park continued. They've been culturing it in their quarters. The Rithki are doing a seed-end grain composition, traditional. Both of them are playing to their strengths. Good, Marcus said. Marcus, Park leaned against the counter. The Vethrani are using this to make us look bad. You know that, right? Koss doesn't care about the food. She cares about embarrassing the human delegation so she can renegotiate Section 3 with leverage. I know, Marcus said. So what are you going to make? Marcus pulled a small jar from the back of the cabinet. He held it up to the light. Inside, dried flakes of something dark red caught the fluorescent glow. I haven't decided yet. Park stared at the jar. What is that? Gochugaru, Marcus said. Korean red pepper flakes. My grandmother used to grow the peppers in her garden in Busan. You brought Korean red pepper flakes to a space station. I bring them everywhere. Park leaned forward. Marcus, seriously, what are you going to make? They've got a 20-year veteran chef with harmonic flavor technology. You've got a jar of red pepper flakes and whatever's in the hydroponic bay. Good. Good, what does that mean? Marcus looked at Park with the patient expression of a man who had been asked this question in various forms by various worried people at various points in his career. Every new posting, the same conversation. Every new kitchen, someone explaining why the ingredients were not enough, the equipment was insufficient, the situation was hopeless. The answer was always the same. The answer had been the same since his grandmother had taught him to wash rice at 5 years old with 3 things: a pot, water, and attention. It means that's enough, Marcus said. Park opened his mouth, closed it, and decided that this was one of those conversations where Marcus had already said everything he intended to say. The morning of the challenge, the galley was reconfigured. 4 prep stations, each equipped with identical base equipment, heating elements, cutting surfaces, mixing implements, hydration units. The Vethrani station had the addition of their own imported ingredients, neatly arranged in sealed containers that gleamed like polished metal. Their chef, a Vethrani male named Preth, stood behind his station with the posture of someone who had been winning culinary competitions since before most of the station crew had been born. He was older than Kas, his gold skin darkened to bronze at the joints, and he wore a formal preparation coat with the Combine's trade crest embroidered over his chest in thread so fine it looked like it had been painted on. Preth surveyed Marcus's station with a slow, deliberate gaze. Coalition protein base, hydroponic vegetables, a bag of rice, a jar of something red, a single knife in a leather sleeve, no thermal cure unit, no resonance oils, no harmonic profiling equipment, no sensory engineering tools of any kind. The assessment took him approximately 4 seconds. His expression did not change, but the way he turned back to his own station carried the particular ease of a competitor who has just confirmed that he is not competing. In the gallery, the audience had filled every seat. Engineers, docking crews, off-duty medical staff, 3 visiting freighter captains including Hollies. The Rithki support delegation had brought sketch pads, a cultural habit for events they considered historically notable, though it was unclear whether they expected the history to be the Vethrani's triumph or the humans' defeat. Facilitator Wen sat in the front row. She had a data pad on her knee and a cup of the coffee Marcus had made for her that morning, which she was drinking with the slow deliberateness of someone who appreciated it more than she usually said. He turned to Kas, who had positioned herself near the observation gallery along with Torek and 2 junior delegates. Preth said something in Vethrani that Marcus did not understand, but Kas's answering exhale through her gill slits was long and slow. Whatever he had said, it was very funny. High-palate Sarova arrived last. She was ancient, even by Vethrani standards, a small figure in deep crimson robes that pooled around her feet. Her skin had gone from gold to a pale silver, and her eyes were milky with age, but her posture was iron straight and her gaze missed nothing. She seated herself on a raised platform that had been installed overnight, a concession to Vethrani tradition that Wen had approved without comment. "Begin," Sarova said. The 6-hour clock started. Preth moved first, and he moved with the confidence of mastery. His hands flowed over his ingredients with practiced certainty, measuring by touch, adjusting by smell. He activated a Vethrani thermal cure unit, a device that looked like a small crystal orb suspended in a magnetic cradle, and the air around his station shimmered with heat that smelled like burnt copper and honey. The resonance oils went into the cure unit first, releasing a scent that rippled through the galley like a chord struck on an instrument nobody else could play. Several observers, including one of the Rithki delegates, leaned forward involuntarily. Kas noticed and smiled. Garik, the Sulan lead, was at his station with his 2 assistants, working the fermented reef paste with the careful, methodical precision of a species that measured time in tidal cycles. The paste was alive, biologically active, and it required constant attention, temperature adjustments, and the addition of mineral-rich brine at intervals that Garik seemed to feel rather than calculate. The Rithki team, a pair of quiet avians named Cheshi and Velat, worked their seed-end grain composition with almost ceremonial care. Each ingredient was individually prepared, each grain toasted to a specific shade, each seed split and dressed with an oil that smelled faintly of warm stone. Marcus washed his rice. He washed it 3 times, swirling the grains in cold water with his fingers, draining the cloudy starch, refilling, repeating. Then he set it to soak. From the observation gallery, Torek leaned toward Kas. "The human is washing grain." "I can see that," Kas said. "He appears to be washing it, repeatedly. Perhaps he believes the grain is dirty." More gill valve laughter. One of the junior Vethrani delegates pulled out a recording device and aimed it at Marcus's station, evidently planning to document the human's inevitable failure for posterity. Koss did not stop her. In the observation gallery, the audience had grown. A cluster of station engineers occupied one section, and a group of Sulan support staff had filed in behind them. Commander Oak stood at the back with his arms crossed, his expression professionally neutral, though his eyes tracked Marcus's movements with the particular attention of a man who had eaten Marcus's cooking every day for 14 months and had opinions he was keeping to himself. Marcus did not look up. He moved to the protein base, a block of reconstituted material that tasted, in its unaltered state, like nothing in particular. He began to cut it into thin strips with a knife that he had brought from Earth, a simple carbon steel blade that he sharpened himself every morning. The cuts were even, precise, each strip identical in thickness to the others. He heated oil in a pan, plain station-issue vegetable oil, nothing special about it. 2 hours in, Koss called for an informal status review. This was within the rules. The arbiter permitted it. The Vethrani chef, Preth, presented his progress with the calm authority of a concert pianist at a warm-up. His thermal cure unit had begun producing visible harmonics, thin ribbons of color that rose from the dish in progress like smoke from incense, each one a different frequency, each one carrying a scent that registered somewhere between taste and emotion. He explained briefly that the resonance architecture would require another 3 hours to achieve full harmonic convergence. The Sulan displayed their reef pastes bacterial culture under a magnification lens. The living colony had developed visible structure, a latticed pattern that reflected their species' coral reef origins. It was, in its own way, beautiful. The Rithki showed their grain compositions mid-stage, rows of individually prepared seeds laid out in chromatic order, from pale gold to deep amber. Each one was already fragrant. Koss turned to Marcus. And the human, what does the human have to show? Marcus looked at his station, strips of protein searing quietly, a pot of rice soaking, a jar of red flakes. It's not ready to show yet, he said. When will it be ready? When it's done. Koss turned to the gallery. Her expression was generous, magnanimous, the face of someone who was already composing the conclusion of a story that had only one possible ending. The human says it will be ready when it is done, she announced. I, for one, look forward to seeing what done looks like. The junior delegate, with the recording device, zoomed in on Marcus's jar of gochugaru. Marcus did not adjust his pace. Then he started building. He seared the protein strips until they developed a crust, then set them aside. He began work on a sauce, and this was where his spice cabinet opened. The gochugaru went in first, bloomed in hot oil until the flakes deepened in color, and the air around his station took on a smell that had nothing to do with coalition-grade anything. It was warm and sharp and immediate, the kind of smell that reached into the back of the sinuses and announced itself. Donjing followed. Fermented soybean paste that he had been aging in a sealed container in the back of his quarters for 4 months. Marcus had started the culture with a base he had brought from Earth, a descendant of a mother culture that his father had maintained for 15 years in the restaurant in Brisbane. Then garlic, fresh from the station's hydroponic bay, the one ingredient he had actively cultivated since arriving. Sesame oil, dark and fragrant. A splash of something from an unlabeled bottle that Park would later identify as fish sauce Marcus had bartered from a Terran supply freighter 3 months earlier. At the 4-hour mark, Koss requested a second status review. Preth's dish had entered its layering phase. The thermal cure unit was now producing full harmonic chords, 3 and 4 frequencies at once, and the air around his station had taken on the quality of a garden in full bloom. Several audience members in the gallery had closed their eyes and were simply breathing, letting the resonance oils work on their neural chemistry. One of the Sulan support staff had tears running down his armored cheeks, though whether from the oils or from genuine emotion was unclear. Marcus was chopping garlic. Koss watched him mince clove after clove with that carbon steel knife, the blade moving in a steady rhythm that never varied and never hurried. "Facilitator when," she said, loud enough for the gallery, "does the human delegation have a contingency plan?" Wen, seated in the front row of the gallery, looked at Koss with the expression of a diplomat who had been asked whether gravity was optional. "Chef Cole is our representative." "I see, and Chef Cole's strategy appears to be—" Koss gestured at Marcus's station, where the garlic was joining the sauce and the galley air was beginning to carry something sharp and warm and very, very different from harmonic resonance. "Chopping." "Preparation," Marcus said without looking up. "I was not speaking to you." "I know," Marcus said. He kept chopping. Torek leaned toward Koss. He spoke in Vethrani, but his voice was lower than before, and his gill slits were not fluttering with amusement. Koss listened, then waved him off with a gesture that was a fraction too sharp. From the gallery, Commander Oak allowed himself a very small smile. Koss was watching now. Her smile had not disappeared, but it had become fixed, the kind of expression worn by someone who is beginning to suspect that the joke might be on them but is not yet willing to admit it. Preth worked his thermal cure, layering flavors in a way that made the air around his station sing. Each new addition to his dish released a different harmonic, a different frequency of scent that built on the ones before it. It was genuinely impressive. The Vethrani approach to cuisine was sensory engineering, and Preth was clearly a master. But Marcus was not trying to engineer anything. He was cooking. There is a difference. Engineering is about control, about precision inputs producing predictable outputs, about understanding every variable and managing each one toward a designed outcome. Cooking, the way Marcus did it, was about knowing what food wanted to become. It was about listening to heat, about feeling the moment when oil was ready, not by measuring its temperature but by holding a hand above the pan and understanding. In the same way a person understands whether a room is friendly, whether the surface was waiting. The audience in the gallery had shifted. The engineers who had come to watch were no longer talking among themselves. The Sulan support staff had stopped fidgeting. Even the Rethki, a species not known for emotional expressiveness, were watching Marcus with a stillness that suggested they were paying the kind of attention they usually reserved for sacred rituals. It was not that Marcus was doing anything dramatic. He was not. He was making food. But the way he made it had a quality that cameras could not capture and engineering could not replicate. There was a rhythm to his movements that was not mechanical. It was bodily. The rhythm of a species that had been cooking over fire for 100,000 years and had never stopped. He blanched vegetables he had pulled from the hydroponic bay that morning: spinach, bean sprouts, carrots, zucchini. Each one prepared separately, each one seasoned differently, each one given exactly the attention it needed and no more. The spinach got sesame oil and a pinch of salt. The bean sprouts got a quick toss in hot oil with garlic. The carrots were julienned and dressed with a vinegar gochugaru mixture that turned them electric. The rice came off the soak and went into the cooker. Marcus had calibrated the water ratio by feel, pressing his fingertip into the grain and measuring the water level against his first knuckle. It was the same method his grandmother had used. It had never required a measurement instrument more sophisticated than a human hand. The galley smelled different now. The Vethrani harmonics were still there, layered and complex, but underneath them something else had arrived, something older and less polished and more direct. The gochugaru and doenjang and sesame and garlic had combined into an aroma that did not interact with neural chemistry through engineered resonance. It interacted with something simpler. It smelled like a kitchen, like someone's kitchen specifically. Like the kind of place where a person had stood for years, making the same thing with the same hands, until the recipe stopped being information and became identity. The junior Vethrani delegate with the recording device lowered it. She was not recording anymore. She was breathing through her gill slits in the slow, measured way that Vethrani breathed when they were processing something unexpected. 3 hours into the challenge, Ka stopped smiling. She did not announce this. She simply stopped. Her face became neutral in the way that a predator's face becomes neutral when it reassesses whether the small thing in front of it is actually small. Preth's dish was taking form. It was beautiful, an elaborate layered construction that shimmered with thermal-cured colors, each layer a different note in a complex flavor chord. The resonance oils gave it a quality that was almost alive, a sense that the dish was breathing, shifting, evolving on the plate. Anyone could see it was a masterwork. Garic's reef paste had matured into something dense and savory, a deep umami bomb that reflected millennia of Sulan tidal kitchen traditions. The Rithki composition was laid out with the precision of a mosaic, each grain and seed placed with deliberate artistry. Marcus was frying an egg. He was frying it in sesame oil, in a pan he had heated to a specific temperature that he knew by sound. The oil should whisper, not shout. When the edges of the egg turned golden and lacy, he slid it onto a waiting plate with a motion so practiced it looked like breathing. Then he assembled the dish. Rice in the center of a wide, shallow bowl. The seasoned vegetables arranged around it in distinct sections, each occupying its own territory, each a different color and texture. The seared protein strips laid across one side, glazed with the gochugaru doenjang sauce that had reduced to something dark and complex and immediate. A small mound of fresh kimchi, which Marcus had been fermenting in a sealed container under his bunk for 3 weeks. The fried egg on top, its yolk still liquid. And beside the bowl, a small dish of the gochugaru sauce, bright red for additional heat. It was bibimbap. The assembly itself took less than 3 minutes. After 6 hours of preparation, the final composition was a matter of placement, of putting things where they belonged. Marcus worked with the certainty of someone following instructions that were not written down because they did not need to be. Each component had its place. Each color occupied its section of the bowl. The architecture of the dish was not designed, it was remembered. When he stepped back, the bowl sat on his station like a complete sentence. In the gallery, nobody spoke. Lieutenant Park was gripping the railing in front of him with both hands. Commander Oak had uncrossed his arms at some point in the last hour without noticing. Even the freighter Captain Hollies, who had come purely for entertainment, was sitting very still. It was the least complicated dish in the room by several orders of magnitude. It had no thermal cure harmonics. It did not shimmer. It was not engineered to interact with neural chemistry. It was rice, vegetables, protein, a fried egg, and fermented paste. It was also the dish that Marcus's grandmother had made every Sunday, and her mother before her, and her mother before that. And at some point the recipe stopped being a recipe and became a language, a way of saying something that words could not carry. The 6 hours ended. High-palate Sarova descended from her platform with the careful dignity of someone who understood that the act of eating was itself a form of judgment. She approached each station in turn. The Sulan presented their reef paste with a brief, formal explanation of its tidal cycle fermentation process. Sarova tasted it, closed her eyes, and nodded once. She made a note on a crystalline tablet she carried. The Rithki presented their seed and grain composition with quiet pride. Sarova examined each element individually before tasting the whole. She nodded twice and made another note. Preth presented his thermal-cured creation with the controlled confidence of a master. He explained each layer, each resonance, each intentional harmonic. Sarova tasted it slowly, her ancient eyes moving as though following the flavors through internal corridors. She remained still for a long time afterward. Then she made several notes. Kasa's expression during Preth's presentation was serene. She turned slightly toward the gallery, allowing the audience to see her confidence. Several of her delegation members were already composing formal congratulations in their heads. Torek had begun drafting the language for the Section 3 renegotiation on his tablet. The conclusion in Kas's mind was already written. The human had made rice with vegetables. Preth had made a sensory masterwork. The distance between them was not a gap, it was a canyon. She settled back in her seat with the particular satisfaction of someone watching the final minutes of a contest they had already won. Serova approached Marcus's station. She walked slowly, but not with hesitation, with intention, as if she understood that what she was about to encounter required a different pace than what had come before. Behind her, Kas had risen from her seat. She did not step forward, but she was standing now, which was not part of the protocol. Torek noticed and said nothing. Marcus stood behind his bowl of bibimbap. He did not explain it. He did not describe the technique, the ingredients, or the cultural significance. He simply stepped aside so that Serova could see the dish clearly. Serova looked at it for a long time. She looked at the rice, white and clean and perfectly textured. She looked at the vegetables, each one distinct, each one a different shade. She looked at the protein, dark with the gochugaru glaze. She looked at the egg, its yolk a trembling gold dome. She looked at the kimchi, red and fermented and alive. "What is this called?" she asked. "Bibimbap," Marcus said. "It means mixed rice." "Mixed rice," Serova repeated. She picked up the utensil Marcus had provided, a simple spoon, and broke the egg yolk. It ran gold over the rice and vegetables, mixing with the red sauce. Serova stirred everything together, the way the dish was meant to be eaten. She tasted it. The galley was very quiet. Serova's eyes, which had been milky and measured throughout the entire tasting, widened. Not dramatically, not with theatrical shock. The shift was subtle, the kind of change that only comes when something reaches past expectation and touches something older, something that precision engineering cannot reach because it does not know the way. She tasted it again, and then a third time, more slowly, holding each bite as though it contained a question she needed time to answer. Serova set the spoon down and stood motionless for 7 seconds. Marcus counted because he was in the habit of counting things. "The grain is washed," she said finally, not as a question. 3 times, Marcus said. "The fermented element, the red." "Kimchi, 3 weeks in a sealed container." 3 weeks, Serova said. "In what conditions?" "Under my bunk, station ambient temperature." Serova turned to look at Kas. The look lasted long enough that Kas's serene expression flickered, not broke, flickered. Serova returned to her platform without saying anything else. She sat. She consulted her tablet. She sat for a very long time. Kas used the silence to lean toward Preth and speak in rapid Vethrani. Preth's expression was unchanged, but his hands, which had been still at his sides, moved to clasp behind his back. A small adjustment, but Marcus noticed. He noticed things. "I will render my evaluation," Serova said. The room adjusted. Delegates sat straighter. Kas arranged her silk layers. "The Sulan preparation is competent," Serova said. "The fermentation is well managed. The mineral balance reflects genuine understanding of the medium. However, the dish is one-dimensional. It speaks in a single voice, and while that voice is clear, it does not linger." Garik accepted this with a slow clack of his mandibles. "The Rithki preparation is precise," Serova continued. "The craftsmanship is evident. Each element is individually excellent. However, the composition lacks conversation between its parts. It is a collection, not a dialogue." Cheshi and Velat dipped their beaked heads in acknowledgement. "Preth's preparation," Serova said, and here she paused. "Preth's preparation is a masterwork of Vethrani culinary tradition. The thermal cure harmonics are flawless. The resonance architecture is layered, complex, and technically beyond reproach. It represents the very best of what the Combine's culinary science can achieve." Kas's expression returned to serenity. Preth inclined his head. However, Sarova said. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. However, it is architecture. It is designed. Every element serves a function that was determined before the preparation began. Every flavor occupies a position that was assigned to it. The dish tells me what Preth intended me to experience. It does not surprise me. It does not reach beyond its own blueprint. Preth's hands, clasped behind his back, tightened. Marcus could see the tendons shift under his bronze skin. Sarova turned to Marcus's station. The human preparation, she said, and her voice changed. Not dramatically. It became quieter, which in Vethrani formal evaluation was the highest register of seriousness. The human preparation is simple. The ingredients are common. The technique is fundamental. There is no thermal cure, no resonance engineering, no architectural layering. Kos leaned forward slightly. And yet, Sarova said, when I tasted it, I was not eating food. I was being spoken to. The silence in the galley became a different kind of silence. Not the silence of waiting, but the silence of people realizing that something they had not expected was happening. The grain is washed by hand, Sarova continued. The fermented element was cultured not in a laboratory, but in a living space, under conditions of necessity rather than precision. The flavors are not harmonized by engineering. They are brought together by instinct, by memory, by a practice so old that it has become part of the species that carries it. She looked at Marcus. This dish does not tell me what to taste. It asks me to remember something, and I do not even know what I am remembering because it is not my memory. It is yours, but it reached me. The room did not move. In the gallery, 43 beings of 7 different species sat in a silence so complete that the hum of the station's life support system sounded like a symphony. Sarova turned to address the room. She did not raise her voice. In Vethrani formal evaluation, the quieter the arbiter spoke, the more weight the words carried. She was barely whispering. I have adjudicated culinary merit evaluations for the Combine for 61 years. I have tasted the work of thermal cure masters on 17 worlds. I have judged resonance architectures that were a decade in the making. I have eaten dishes that rearranged my perception of what food could be. She paused. I have never been spoken to by a bowl of rice. The silence held. What the human presented is not a dish in the way that the Combine understands dishes. It is not engineered. It is not designed. It is not optimized. It is the opposite of everything the Combine's culinary tradition teaches. And it is the most complete expression of cultural merit I have encountered in my career, because it does not attempt to impress. It attempts to share. And in sharing, it reveals a depth of connection between a species and its food that the Combine's 9,000 years of culinary science have not achieved. Kos was standing now. She had risen without deciding to. The evaluation, Sarova said, awards highest culinary merit to the human delegation. Nobody exhaled through their gill slits. The gallery was motionless. Torek's tablet, where he had been drafting the Section 3 renegotiation language, sat dark in his hands. He had stopped writing 3 minutes ago. Kos's expression did not break, but something behind it rearranged itself. Her eyes moved from Sarova to Marcus and stayed there. She was looking at him the way someone looks at a word in a language they thought they understood, realizing they had been mispronouncing it. Torek beside her had his mouth slightly open. His gill slits were still. The compact negotiation, Sarova continued, will proceed with the human delegation holding preferential advisory position, as agreed. The delegation demonstrating the lowest merit, which in this evaluation is a tie between the Sulan and the Rethki, will withdraw their respective objections to Section 3's current framework. Garrick clacked his mandibles but did not protest. The Rithki dipped their heads. However, Sarova added, looking directly at Kos, I will note for the record that the Combine's delegation, while demonstrating exceptional technical mastery, ranked second. I recommend that this be reflected in the arbiter's report to the Combine Council. The sound that Koss did not make was louder than any gill valve laughter. In the observation gallery, Park exhaled. He had been holding his breath for approximately 90 seconds without realizing it. Commander Oak was still standing with his arms uncrossed, and there was an expression on his face that Park would later describe, in a private message to his sister on Earth, as the look of a man who has just watched something he will never be able to explain to anyone who wasn't there. The junior Vethrani delegate who had been recording tucked her device away. Whatever she had captured, she did not seem inclined to share it in the spirit of mockery anymore. The conference resumed that afternoon. Section 3 moved forward. The Mineral Rights Compact advanced further in 4 hours than it had in the previous 6 days. Something had shifted in the room's gravity. Not the station's artificial gravity, which remained at the standard 0.97 g that allowed all 7 resident species to function. The other kind of gravity, the kind that determines who in a room has weight and who does not. Before the challenge, Koss had occupied the center of every conversation, every silence, every decision. Her presence had bent the negotiations around itself the way a star bends light. After the challenge, she was still present, still sharp, still formidable. But the bending had stopped. She negotiated from a position of equality rather than presumed superiority, and the difference was visible in the way the other delegations responded. Garrick spoke more. The Rithki offered amendments they had previously kept in reserve. Wen managed the session with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had been given an unexpected tool and used it well. Nobody mentioned the competition directly. Nobody needed to. The bibimbap had become a fact in the room, the way a landmark becomes a fact on a map, reshaping every route around it without being on any of them. Marcus served the afternoon refreshments. Coalition-grade provisions, nutritionally optimized, multi-species compatible. He placed a cup in front of each delegation without comment. When he reached Koss, she did not look at the cup. She looked at him. "Chef Cole," she said. The word chef landed differently this time. She pronounced it the way she pronounced the names of Vethrani trade houses she considered legitimate. "Ambassador," Marcus said. "The fermented element, the red one." "Kimchi. I would like to understand it." Marcus paused. He recognized this as a significant sentence from a Vethrani. They did not say "I would like to understand" lightly. In Vethrani culture, it was an admission that one's existing framework was insufficient. Coming from a trade caste ambassador in front of her own delegation, it was roughly equivalent to a public apology. "It takes time," Marcus said. 3 weeks minimum, longer is better." "And the red powder?" "Gochugaru, dried pepper flakes." "Where does it come from?" "Earth, Korea specifically, a peninsula." Koss processed this. "A peninsula," she repeated. "A geographic feature on a single planet in a mid-range star system." "Yes." "And this geographic feature's cuisine defeated the Combine's most accomplished thermal cure master." Marcus considered several possible responses. He went with the simplest one. The dish didn't defeat anyone, it's just food. Koss studied him for a long moment. Then she did something that Marcus had not seen a Vethrani do in 6 days of negotiations. She inclined her head. It was a small motion, a few degrees, barely noticeable. But Torek's gill slits fluttered, and the 2 junior delegates exchanged a glance that suggested they had never seen their ambassador do it before. "Just food," Koss said. She turned back to the conference table. That evening, Preth found Marcus in the galley. The Vethrani chef entered without announcement, which was unusual. Vethrani protocol demanded a formal greeting sequence before entering someone else's workspace. Preth either did not care or had decided that the rules of this particular encounter were different. He stood on the other side of the prep counter and watched Marcus clean his equipment. Marcus dried his knife, ran a whetstone along its edge 3 times, and set it in its leather sleeve. "Your knife," Preth said. His standard was accented but precise. "It is not station issue." "No," Marcus said. "My father's, he was a cook too." "Carbon steel." "Yes." "Requires daily maintenance." "Yes." Preth was quiet for a moment. Then, "My thermal cure unit cost more than this station's annual food budget. It maintains 840 harmonic profiles simultaneously. I have trained with it for 20 years. Marcus nodded. "It's a beautiful instrument." "Your knife costs nothing. Your ingredients are salvage. Your fermented element was cultured under your sleeping platform." Preth paused. "And your dish spoke to a high palate who has been judging combine cuisine for 60 years. Spoke to her in a language she did not know she could hear." Marcus folded his cleaning cloth. He did not rush to fill the silence. "How?" Preth said. The word was not angry. It was genuine. A master asking a question he had never needed to ask before. Marcus thought about this. He thought about his grandmother's kitchen in Busan, the cracked tile floor, the cast iron pot that was older than anyone in the family could remember, the way she never measured anything because the measurements lived in her hands. He thought about his father's restaurant in Brisbane, 12 tables, no reservations, a menu that changed when the ingredients changed and never when they did not. He thought about the first time he had made bibimbap on a starship, alone in a galley at 3 in the morning, because he could not sleep, and the only thing that made sense was to wash rice and cut vegetables and build something that carried the shape of a place he could not go back to. "My grandmother," Marcus said, "couldn't read a recipe, couldn't read at all for most of her life. She cooked from memory, not her own memory, her mother's memory and her mother's before that, somewhere back far enough that nobody knows where it started." He looked at Preth. "Your thermal cure unit remembers 840 profiles. My grandmother remembered 1, but she remembered it with her whole body." Preth stood very still. His bronze skin, weathered at the joints, caught the galley light the way old wood catches lamplight. Warm, textured, real. "I was not outperformed," Preth said carefully. "I was outcooked." He paused, processing his own words, and added, "I did not know there was a difference until today." "There isn't always," Marcus said. "Sometimes performing is the right answer. Your harmonic work is legitimate. Those flavors are real." "Real," Preth repeated. "Yes, designed, calibrated, predicted, and real." He looked at Marcus's knife resting in its sleeve on the counter. "Your flavors were not predicted. They could not have been predicted, because they were not assembled from principles. They were inherited." Marcus considered this. It was, he thought, one of the more precise things anyone had ever said about his cooking. "If it helps," Marcus said, "your dish was the best thermal cure work I've ever seen." "It does not help," Preth said, but the way he said it was almost amused. Almost. A crack in the Vethrani composure that was not embarrassment or defeat but something more interesting, the beginning of curiosity. He left the galley without the formal exit sequence either. At the threshold, he stopped. His hand rested on the doorframe for a moment, the long fingers pressing against the metal as if testing its temperature, its willingness to hold weight. "The fermented element, the red one." "Kimchi." "I would like to learn." Marcus nodded. "Come back tomorrow morning before the station wakes up. Bring a container." "What kind of container?" "Anything that seals. Glass is best, but anything that seals will work." Preth considered this. In 20 years of thermal cure mastery, he had never been told that the container did not matter. Every element of Vethrani cuisine was calibrated, from the molecular composition of the serving vessel to the electromagnetic properties of the preparation surface. The idea that a fermentation container could be Anything that seals was either primitive or profound, and Preth was no longer certain he could tell the difference. He inclined his head the same way Koss had, a few degrees, barely visible, but from a Vethrani thermalcure master it carried the weight of a standing ovation. The compact negotiations concluded 2 days later. The mineral rights framework was signed by all 4 parties. The Vethrani Combine accepted terms that were, by any objective analysis, more equitable than anything they had initially proposed. Koss signed with the precise, unhurried hand of someone who had recalculated her position and found it wanting. At the closing ceremony, she requested that the catering be handled by the station's kitchen rather than the Vethrani delegation's provisions. It was the first time in recorded history that a Vethrani trade ambassador had deferred to an outside kitchen for a formal function. When the request reached Marcus via Wen, he received it the same way he received all catering requests. He noted the head count, checked his inventory, and started planning. Marcus made bibimbap for 40. He did not alter the recipe. He did not elaborate or refine or add complexity. He made it the way he always made it, the way his grandmother made it, the way it had been made for generations before interstellar travel was a concept, before the Vethrani Combine existed, before anyone had thought to engineer flavor into harmonic profiles. Rice, vegetables, protein, fermented paste, a fried egg, gochugaru. The Sulan delegation ate in silence, which for them was the highest compliment. Garrick's mandibles did not clack once. The Rithki pair each tasted every component separately before combining them, cataloging the experience with the methodical appreciation of a species that understood that simple did not mean small. Cheshi, the senior of the two, paused midway through her bowl and looked at Velat. They exchanged a glance that carried an entire conversation, and then Cheshi resumed eating with the slow, deliberate attention of someone who wanted to remember every second of the experience. The station crew ate with the casual possessiveness of people who had known all along. Several engineers went back for seconds. One went back for thirds and received a look from Marcus that was not disapproval, but was adjacent to it. The Vethrani delegation ate slowly. Torek ate 3 bowls. Koss ate 1 bowl very slowly, and when she finished she set down her utensil and sat with her hands folded in her lap for a long time. Preth did not eat at the ceremony. He was in the galley with Marcus, learning to wash rice. 3 times, Marcus said, showing him the swirl, the drain, the refill. No more, no less. The starch removal is the goal. The starch removal is the side effect. The goal is respect. You wash the rice because the rice deserves to be clean. Preth looked at him. His milky eyes, ancient and precise, held an expression Marcus had not seen before, not surprise, not admiration, something closer to the look of a man who discovers a door in a room he thought he had mapped completely. On Vethra, Preth said, we say that a master has nothing left to learn when they can predict every outcome before it arrives. My grandmother would have said that's the saddest thing she'd ever heard. Preth held the rice in his hands. The grain slipped between his long fingers, pale and clean and simple. Your grandmother, he said, was correct. The summit ended. The delegations departed. Reports were filed. Mineral rights were allocated. The Vethrani Combine, for the first time in its trading history, added a culinary exchange clause to a formal compact, stipulating that future joint operations would include a shared kitchen facility staffed by rotating cultural representatives. Koss had drafted the clause herself. When Wen asked her about it during the final session, Koss had looked at her with an expression that, on a human face, would have been called chastened. On a Vethrani face, it was something more complex, a rearrangement of assumptions so fundamental that it required a new expression to contain it. The Combine, Koss said, has always believed that cultural merit is demonstrated through mastery, through the perfection of technique, through the elimination of uncertainty. She paused. Your cook showed us that uncertainty is not an imperfection. It is the thing that makes food alive. Chef, Wen corrected quietly. Cass inclined her head, those few degrees again. Chef, she said, yes. Torek, beside her, was writing something on his tablet. He had been writing for some time. When Park asked him about it later, Torek explained that he was composing a formal cultural assessment of the experience for the Combine's Department of Interspecies Understanding. The assessment was titled On the Difference Between Eating and Being Fed. It would circulate through 6 departments and reach 4 planetary governors within a standard cycle. It began, we came to Kephis 4 believing we understood food. A human with a jar of dried pepper flakes demonstrated that we understood ingredients. Facilitator Wen filed her after-action report with the Human Diplomatic Corps. Under resolution method, she wrote, standard negotiation, assisted by an unorthodox cultural demonstration. Under key personnel, she listed Marcus Cole, head cook, orbital station Kephis 4. Under notes, she wrote, recommend supplementing Chef Cole's spice requisition. His current inventory is personal supply, acquired through barter and family shipments. The man brought Gachugaru to a space station, and it may have changed interspecies trade policy. Allocate a budget line. Marcus did not read the report. He was not aware it existed. He went back to his galley, washed his knife, sharpened it, and started prepping for the next day's breakfast cycle. Station ambient. Coalition-grade provisions, 7 species, 12 dietary profiles, 1 galley, 1 cook. Before he began, he checked the fermenting container under his bunk. The next batch of kimchi was coming along. Another week, maybe 10 days. He sealed it, slid it back under the bunk, and returned to the kitchen. Lieutenant Park found him there an hour later, running inventory. Marcus. Park. Cass's office sent a formal commendation. To you, specifically. It's got the Combine trade seal on it. Marcus noted this with the same expression he used when noting that the hydroponic bay had produced a good batch of spinach. It says, and I'm translating loosely from the Vethrani formal register, that you demonstrated, quote, a depth of cultural merit that the Combine had not previously associated with the human species. Marcus looked up from his inventory tablet. That's nice. That's nice, Park repeated. Marcus, the Vethrani Combine has never issued a culinary commendation to a non-Vethrani in their entire history. Their entire history. They've been a spacefaring civilization for 9,000 years. It's still nice, Marcus said. He went back to the inventory. Park stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, the kind of short, helpless laugh that comes from watching someone be exactly who they are and realizing that this, precisely this, was the thing the aliens had failed to account for. What's for breakfast? Park asked. Eggs, Marcus said. Rice, whatever the bay gives me. Coalition grade. Marcus paused. He reached into his spice cabinet and pulled out the jar of Gachugaru. He held it up to the light the way a jeweler might hold up a stone, checking its color, its depth, its readiness. Coalition grade, he said, with a little something extra. Park shook his head and left the galley smiling. Marcus set the jar on the counter, washed his hands, picked up his father's knife and began to cook. The station hummed around him. 7 species slept in their quarters, dreaming in 7 different biologies of 7 different concepts of home. In the morning they would come to his galley, and he would feed them, and the food would be simple, and it would be good, and it would carry in every grain of rice and every flake of red pepper the quiet, unshakable conviction that cooking was not a science and it was not an art. It was a conversation. And the only ingredient that mattered was the one you could not measure, the memory of every hand that had made the dish before yours. Somewhere in the Vethrani Combine's archives, a new file had been opened. It was a small file, provisional, flagged for expansion. Its subject line read, Human Culinary Practices, Cultural Significance Assessment. The assessment had been requested by High Pilot Serova herself, and it carried her personal annotation, a single line in the old formal script that only senior arbiters still used. It read, "We have been eating for 9,000 years. We have not yet learned to cook.